First of all, Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for being here. We had a great year last year. Most of you know we've been growing phenomenally. We're more than doubled. We may be tripled in our membership size soon. I'm hoping we'll get to about 1,000 in the next couple of months, so that would be awesome. I think we're officially now the #2 blockchain meetup in the Seattle area, which is fantastic. So thanks for your help in making that happen. Obviously, without you guys, we couldn't do this. So let's get started. We're missing Aaron. I don't see Aaron. So just a quick intro. So Marissa, we have over at the door. She's one of our organizers. And then Aaron, and he's AWOL right now. So look at everybody's seated here except for the guy that's supposed to be here. Anyway, Aaron's the other guy. He's the other person that helps to make this thing work out so well. So thanks to these guys. Okay, first off, thanks to our sponsors. Change Healthcare occupies a uniquely interconnected position at the center of healthcare, serving providers, payers, and consumers. As an independent healthcare IT company, we work with multiple platforms to address diverse needs. Oh, there's Davis. I was wondering where you were. Okay. And then also thanks to Aaron, wherever he is. And so we're at UW CoMotion Labs here for providing the venue for this HSM event. All of our HMS events are powered by CoMotion, your innovation partner. And that's almost like a trademark. So sponsorship obviously really helps to make these events happen. Without sponsorship, we don't have a venue. Without a venue, we have nowhere to meet. And of course, the water and the food and all the other sort of expendables are paid through sponsors. Because we're a not-for-profit organization, we don't ask money from you guys. We can't do that. So we really do rely on our sponsors pretty heavily. Okay, community announcements. So a lot of folks here are new. How many people are brand new to a meetup? All right, and who's been around for ages and ages? Seth, I know for sure. Eping for sure. So these guys kind of know the ropes, but I'll go over a couple of items just real quickly. So we use microphones here. I have a mic on, and I've got another mic we're going to pass around. It isn't for amplification in the room. These recordings go out to YouTube on the Hyperledger channel. It's all about YouTube. So even though you may think you can hear or you can speak without a microphone, and I'm sure you could, we need the mic just to record your voice for the sake of YouTube. Otherwise, I guarantee what's going to happen, and it's happened before, and it'll happen again today, I'm sure. Someone will have a question, won't wait for the mic. They'll ask the question, and then the person that's mic'd, in this case Davis, will answer. And so the video will look like, hey, Davis said something randomly, and it makes him look sort of silly. So I have to go and I have to sort of edit things out and make it go away. So be sure to have the mic in hand. I'll show you what the mic looks like. It's a handheld. It has a little yellow end on it. This is the only way that you can make a question. And we'll rotate around and we'll run the mics to you. Okay, and it takes about a week or so to get up onto YouTube, and it's through the Hyperledger channel. Usually we'll post a little blurb up on our meetup site to say the video is available. So this is our very first healthcare industry presentation, and the irony is that 2 of our 3 organizers, myself and Marissa, have backgrounds in healthcare, and for the past year we've been very sensitive not to influence this meetup, and of course it's taken us a year to put together a healthcare presentation. So I'm happy. How many people are in healthcare specifically? Awesome. So anyone from like Seattle Health Innovators? No? What is this? Healthcare design, the design group? Nobody? Oh, man. Okay. So it's great to have you in the healthcare space. This is fantastic. We have backgrounds, like I said, in the healthcare space. We really believe in blockchain technologies in healthcare. Davis will be speaking on this topic momentarily, and so I'm thrilled. Personally, I'm thrilled. So this is outstanding. And as far as membership goes, about 10% of our membership has an explicit background in healthcare as well. So that's interesting. And because this is healthcare, and I think I mentioned it earlier to someone here. So Hyperledger is an organization under the Linux Foundation. We also host a special interest group in healthcare. So if you're interested in the healthcare space using Hyperledger umbrella of frameworks, feel free to come contact me. We run, and this is an international organization of over 1,000 members, and we meet every other week on a telecon using Zoom. And it's a great opportunity to get more involved using blockchain technologies in healthcare and meet amazing folks globally. So if you're interested, probably the easiest thing to do would be, let's see, hyperledger.org, but easier still would be wiki.hyperledger.org. Or come and talk to me, or talk to Marissa. Where did Marissa go? There she is. Oh. So Marissa is active in this organization, and Ben, Digi, I don't see Ben right now. Okay. So actually there's a handful of us here in the Seattle area that are active in this organization. Good group of folks. Since we're at the top of the year, let me give you a summary of our survey results for 2019. And this is really a look back. We're looking forward for us to help set up upcoming events. Majority of our members are in technology, 35%, in software, 15%, and in consulting, 15%, which is probably about right. And then I mentioned 10% in healthcare, among others. Most interested in education and social networking. That's what we're doing right now. Yay. Familiar with blockchain technologies for between 1 and 3 years. That's about 55% of membership. A moderate level of technical expertise using blockchain technologies. And I'll also add, it's still pretty diverse. It's still pretty broad spectrum, meaning we have experts in this field, and then we have folks that are very new, just sort of visiting, trying to get a sense for what the technologies might mean. And I suspect as time goes forward, we'll start to maybe narrow that a little bit, and we'll see folks move away from Hyperledger, particularly as a platform. They'll go choose something else. But for now, it's still fairly broad. Ethereum and Bitcoin are the most familiar non-Hyperledger project technologies. Probably no surprise there. Primary interest in using Hyperledger is to solve business problems. No surprise. Moderately diverse overall understanding of Hyperledger. Fabric and Composer are the most familiar Hyperledger framework and tool. And again, most of us probably use Fabric and Composer all the time. Davis, do you guys use Composer even? Yeah, okay. And Composer is getting phased out, blah, blah, blah. Monthly Seattle site meetings preferred using email for membership. Okay, that's why we're here. And this was fairly interesting, and we really don't know what to do with this. 100% of people that responded indicated that they'd be interested in attending an HSM event, which is what this is, where the topic was not specifically about Hyperledger. So I don't know what that means. I can interpret that as you really enjoy these presentations and you don't care what the topic is. I don't know. Anyway, 100% of anything is really kind of like statistically almost an impossibility, but it happened. So I'm not really sure how to factor that. But what we are going to do is broaden sort of our impact on the kinds of topics that we bring forward, and they may not necessarily have to be very stringently Hyperledger related. And maybe not even we'll see. This is a Hyperledger meetup, so we have to be Hyperledger centric in some way. Okay. And I just sort of read through this earlier today. We may want to. Who would be interested in doing a crazy social event? And of course, that's a loaded question. No one's going to say anything. It's crazy. But I just saw an email go by about a whale watching opportunity where you get on a boat. You float around in the sound for a couple hours and you find whales. Anyway, anyone interested in doing something like that? Yeah, we have got a couple folks. Hannah's up for it. I'll send an email out just as a test to see if you guys are interested. It's a cool opportunity if you've never done something like this before. Every time that I've gone, I've seen whales. Believe it or not, I thought it was goofy, but I have seen whales. So it may be a cool opportunity. Just something that came through in the email earlier today. So I thought I'd pass it along. Okay, it is raffle time. So we have two things to raffle off. We have a sports bottle, and let me grab it. And I could never quite say what it is. It's a water bottle, but it's insulated. It's very cool. Of course, it's Hyperledger. So we've got that. And we've got a cool T-shirt. So we got a neat T-shirt here. Yay. So the way we do it is when you signed in, you have a number assigned to you, and Marissa is going to help me out here. So our first magic number is 149. Who is it? All right, yay. T-shirt or water bottle?
I'll take the T-shirt.
T-shirt. All right, and we hit it the first time.
Wow.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, and the water bottle, number 154. Seth, he's already got one. And he's holding it. How did it come from over there to over there? All right, next, 158, Marissa.
David.
Hey, he's our speaker. You're going to give that up to the common good? That's the right answer because you wouldn't speak otherwise. Okay, 153. Scott, all right. Nice. Perfect. There you go, sir. Okay, usually that takes an interminable amount of time. I'm very happy that it did not. Okay. Next events coming up. So next month on 2/25, we have Greg Scarry from Altoros. He'll be speaking on blockchain and over-the-counter or OTC markets. I think that'll be our very first fintech event here. And then unannounced, but we're working on getting the details squared away, Scott Tupper is the CEO of Yave Coffee. He actually works right around the corner here. He's scheduled for 3/21. He'll be speaking on their coffee bean supply chain using blockchain technologies. And I haven't, like I said, it hasn't gone out in announcements quite yet. We still need to sort of dial in on topic. He has an interesting sort of slant that he wants to be able to provide to us. So we're working on details on that, but that's coming up 3/21. And then in talks currently, we have Lisa Mackey, the co-founder and former CEO of PocketDoc. I think Marissa's sort of working on that. Garrett Conity. Is Garrett here? There he is. Hey, Garrett. Of Conity Consulting, and you're going to be talking about Fabric DevOps. And we're going to try to get that sometime April, May timeframe, somewhere around there. And I was just talking DevOps with somebody. So talk to these guys, 1, 2, 3, that row there. They were talking DevOps. They may be interested in talking to you. Okay, on to the presentation. So we've got Davis Aites over here. He's going to be talking on Change Healthcare's first enterprise-scale blockchain solution for healthcare. Davis is a lifelong technologist with a varied background in software development and information technologies. Currently serving as an enterprise architect at Change Healthcare. Davis has over 20 years of experience in developing internet-scale solutions in a wide variety of technologies. Davis lives in Seattle, and when not coding or drawing diagrams, which is an odd way to sort of frame it out, he enjoys motorcycling, woodworking, and guitar. So very cool. So everyone, please welcome our speaker, Davis. All right. I'm going to hand that over to you.
Do the logistics here. All right.
Perfect.
Want to verify we're good on audio and everything? Cool. All right, everyone. Also, bear with me a moment. We'll get the presentation up. We'll get started.
I'm going to scoot over here and turn off the lights.
Thank you. Everyone's moments and eyes to adjust. Well, hopefully it's not that. Hopefully it's not that. We did test this earlier, by the way, so.
Yeah, it was working fine.
It was working fine when we
It
started.
was too easy.
All right, it's coming. Okay, perfect. All right, cool. That's good enough. We'll let that warm up, and then meanwhile we can just start talking. So, all right, we good with audio and everything too? All right. So I'll introduce myself again, just so you know who you're talking to. So again, my name is Davis Aites, enterprise architect at Change Healthcare. Like Richard mentioned, over 20 years of professional experience in software, quite a bit more than that in unprofessional experience, but we won't go much into that. My background's mostly startups, honestly. I've been in Seattle over 20 years, done a lot of startups, all of which have failed, and that's cool. You learn a lot that way, right? So I came to Change Healthcare about 5 years ago, and I helped found our Seattle office, and I'll talk about what the company does in a moment, to really start thinking about what are better ways to bring modernization to the development practices in healthcare. And it's been an interesting 5-year ride, and we're actually making progress, I think. So I work for the Office of the CTO, and one of my primary roles, I have a couple of roles, but one of them is I am the lead architect on our new Intelligent Medical Network, which we'll be talking about in a moment, and then also in emerging technologies such as blockchain. So that's part of what I do. It helps if I actually turn my clicker on, which is cool. All right, so let me talk a little about Change Healthcare. The subject of the talk today, we're going to talk a little bit about who Change Healthcare is, just really briefly to set the stage. We'll talk about the problem, the business problem that we're facing, one of them in healthcare, and then dive into how we envision blockchain technologies, and in fact, the product we launched a year ago on Hyperledger Fabric. We'll talk about that a bit as well. So, Change Healthcare. So we are one of the largest independent healthcare technology companies. We sit in the middle. By the way, probably no one's ever heard of us, so that's cool. But we sit in the middle between providers and payers. So for those of you who, and we're going to go into this more, but for those of you who understand or are familiar with the healthcare system, you don't walk into a doctor and pay your bill directly, right? There's this whole mechanism of insurance and multiple insurers and things being split across multiple payers. You know, it's a complicated system. We'll talk a little bit in the middle. We provide network solutions that allow that to all function, I won't say seamlessly, but I will say as well as it can. And we're looking to make it more efficient and modernize it. We also do software and analytics, providing solutions to our customers for where people bring healthcare data, and we provide analytics to them and specific software as well as technology-enabled solutions. That's considered like a consulting arm too. So we're about 15,000 employees now, all over the country and internationally, in fact. Seattle office is about 30, so little teeny office here. We're going to really focus on the network solutions today because that's where the blockchain comes in. So, all right. So I mentioned the Intelligent Healthcare Network, and there is actually a TM on this one. So just because you gotta have that. This paints the picture of our ecosystem that we live in, and this is the U.S. healthcare system. Our company handles about 14 billion healthcare transactions a year, so we operate at scale. We're connected to 900,000 physicians, 5,500 payers, or hospitals, 2,100 payers. We handle over $1 trillion a year in healthcare claims go through our systems. Over 60% of all the claims in the U.S., eligibility requests, which is a request that happens when you go to a doctor or a physician and say, hey, I want to get something done. And they say, great, are you eligible? And they fire off a request, comes back, yay or nay. And then later in that cycle, the doctor will file a claim, say, I want to get paid. We'll talk more about that. So what we do is connect all this together, and it seems like it should be simple, right? It's just connecting things together. And yet it turns out that it's not. It turns out that all of these systems, trying to connect them together, all speak different languages, right? From a technical point of view. And you have EDI, but it turns out like anytime you have a standard, different implementations of the standard actually vary considerably. So what we're able to do is add value by minimizing the friction in that ecosystem. So that's what the Intelligent Healthcare Network is to do. We have this now. We've been around in various forms for over 20 years as a company. The branding is new. The Change Healthcare branding is new. But we have a number of these switches, and now we need, switch is another word for this, and now we're taking this to a new level. So let's talk about blockchain. That's who we are. Set the stage a little bit. And there's some really good reasons that we think that blockchain technology in healthcare can provide some immense value. And I mean, I think I saw, but can I see again, how many people were in healthcare or involved in it? Okay, so a fair amount. So our healthcare system, the first reason I'll talk about is $1 trillion. And that's the amount that is just wasted every year. That's an estimation on just sheer waste in fraud, waste, and abuse in our healthcare system in the US. It just goes away, vanishes. If you add these up, it comes out to about 30%. US spends about $3 trillion a year on healthcare, and about a third of that could be probably eliminated through some modern efficiencies. That's a pretty good reason to start thinking about ways to do this more efficiently. And we'll talk how blockchain enters into this. For those of you who aren't as familiar with some of these sources of waste, and I can send this link out later. This is actually a great Harvard Business Review article that talks about the details. Clinical waste has to do with just intervening too late, perhaps, or the wrong intervention in a clinical setting, doing things wrong, and usually that's due to information, incorrect information at the wrong time. Administrative complexity, this has to do with just the sheer, if you've ever, I don't know, been in even interacting with a doctor's office, I think you've probably seen just, it's never right? Things don't ever work right for some reason. And that's because there are all these old processes, and there's all these old systems, and they're complex and for various reasons. But a lot of it can be just reduced. And we're talking about administrative systems like writing out a form here, faxing it over here, sending it across the wire to somewhere else. Billing itself, Everyone outsources billing because no one understands it. Excessive prices, this has to do with no one understanding it, so then people have to charge more because you have to make up. So as a business, one thing you do, is if you don't understand something or you have risk, you charge more in order to accommodate that. And then to make up for fraud and abuse. And even 7% of all of the healthcare spending, that's a piece of that number, is fraud, actual outright fraud and abuse, Intentionally having payments issued to the wrong place. And doctors, we are, at Change Healthcare is in a really nice position on this because we actually see all of these claims coming through. So we do this, we actually can start to spot patterns. Like the same doctor does the same operations 50 times. Yeah, maybe not. So that's a reason. And a lot of this boils down to data reconciliation. And I won't spend too long on this, but the idea here is if you think about data reconciliation is the idea that different entities in a distributed transaction have different information at different times. And that data needs to be synchronized in order for everyone to optimize their interactions. And just that data being out of sync causes massive confusion and expense. We'll even get into why in a moment. But it really boils down to a lot. You have redundancy in data, you have errors, and you have, it just is expense. So we own our healthcare data, That's what we do. That's, I own my healthcare data. You own your healthcare data. Do you know where it is? Do you know how to access it? Can you get to it? That's an interesting problem, Here's a highly simplified view of how this works. And I apologize for the little microscopic text here. You don't really have to read it. I'm going to walk through this briefly. So each party in this interaction, let me introduce the parties. So we've got consumers. That's you or me walking in, go to the doctor, getting a checkup. Every provider, that's the doctor. It can be hospitals too. There's lots of different types of providers. Anybody providing a medical service. A processor. Well, let me talk about a payer. Payers are actually the ones who actually pay the bills. They're the insurance companies, the federal government, state governments. There's all Medicaid. There's all kinds of payers. Processors. Well, payers don't actually do much of the processing anymore. They outsource most of that to processors. They do some, but it turns out companies like Change Healthcare and a few others also do a fair bit of, and this is just pure data validation a lot of times, right? Applying rules to data, making sure that people can talk. Running through this really briefly, providers, whoops, let me click the right button. I wanted my fancy laser. Oh, there we go. All right. Providers send a claim to the processor. Processor validates it, maybe sends it back, you get a loop there. Everything's happy. Processor forwards it on to the payer. Okay. Great. Response is sent. Maybe there's a loop there. Payer then says, all right, I'm going to send an explanation of benefits, which if we've all probably received. And what this is a thing in the mail that says this is not a bill. And you look at it and say, well, why are you sending it to me then? And what am I supposed to pay? And they say, well, don't worry about that. Your provider will get back to you. So your provider eventually gets back to you with a bill. And then the consumer, you, is highly confused as to what you actually owe, especially if you have multiple insurance, right? Or you have an episode of care over multiple providers. So if you've ever done something where over a course of period of time you've had to go to various hospitals and various doctors for treatment, and it all kind of ties together, it doesn't tie together in the systems. So then you end up with these phone calls, right? You end up calling the payer, you end up with phone calls to the provider calls the consumer calls the provider who says, I don't know, and then calls the payer, and everyone's just calling each other and faxing each other in this loop, right? And that's just one of the ways this all gets to be a mess. A couple numbers that you probably can't see because they're too small on the slide. According to the AMA, right, the American Medical Association, providers lose around $20 billion a year to this process. The scale of this problem is astounding, right? And I mean, how do they make that up? Well, they charge more. And then when they charge more, well, part of that gets messed up into the cycle too. Just fraud, waste, and abuse in this system, and that can be unintentional, right? That can just be getting a billing thing wrong. That's tens of billions of dollars. How do we make it better? Well, here's one way to think about it. So what's nice is I'm speaking to a blockchain audience, so I don't have to go and talk about what blockchain is, so that's cool. But what if you did something like this, right? So where blockchain becomes the record of proof and the source of truth for your claim activity. And I'll walk through what that would look like. Right, so let's jump ahead to where smart contracts are a little more viable than they are now. But you can take the idea that the payer could create the rules for the claim, right? They're actually just rules. Right now, they're enforced by various business logic, by companies like me, by a company as a clearinghouse. Everyone's got their own rules, turns out. That's okay. But you could publish those. So when your provider actually treats a patient and submits a claim, you could actually enforce that contractually on a centralized blockchain with an event going across the board. You notice the processor has been cut out of this whole section right now, for now. The next thing would be that the processor, being still an important outsourced entity, would actually see that this has happened and could actually then submit the claim back to the provider. The consumer has access to this information at all times and can make payments even potentially on maybe potentially another chain. So then everyone for those of you who are technical, you can view this as a decentralized enterprise service bus, effectively, event modeling in the sky, right? Somebody's got to run it. It's got to exist. So, but if you think about it from a kind of a architectural point of view, you can sort of see what's happening there. And then that all gets recorded. Cool. So what's Change Healthcare specifically doing? We are apparently, I had that problem with the slide earlier too. There we go. So this is why we're investing in blockchain. Change Healthcare has made a significant investment. We have a small team who's working on this. I am involved peripherally, but what we're doing is we view this as a transformative technology. We don't know where it's going to go yet. We think it's still early. I did write an internal white paper on this. There are some fundamental issues that need to be solved before we do really take this to a true enterprise level and have that vision that I presented earlier, but they're going to be solved. And the best way to do that is to be part of solving it and to start to guide how that is going to work. And to get involved with all of the companies who are going to be solving this, right? So it's early. Even though it feels late, right? Sometimes, right? I don't know how long you've been involved, but I've been doing this for a little while. And this year really saw you've seen all the kind of the crash of the hype, right? I mean, it's been article after entire Fortune issue devoted to blockchain. Special business, entire things devoted to blockchain, and now we're seeing all this crash, and everyone's like, to me, this is the fun time because now we're getting out of all of this hype, right? We're getting out of all the things. We're starting to see what the real technology will be used for in the next real steps. This is where it starts to get real, and it'll get quiet. It'll go out of the news, and then the technology will start to actually come into its own. We think there's huge potential here for identity management, not just claiming, but identity management. Other areas in healthcare, we don't even know what all the use cases are yet. The only way to do it is to experiment. I work a lot with AWS, and a lot of times you just need to get in there and actually do it, right? You need to do something. I'm an engineer for a long time. I'm an architect now, but that doesn't mean I believe it's okay to just draw diagrams and think that until you actually have deployed something that you know how it works. Disrupts our market. We're a clearinghouse. If our duty to our customers and our board of directors, we're not a public company, but and to our investors and even to ourselves, there's a serious potential here for complete disruption of our own business. And we should take that seriously, and we should do it to ourselves. Right? It's a hard thing to say for a lot of companies. Companies can easily get blindsided, but it potentially could. At the very least, it's transformative. And in the end, this helps healthcare, right? Which honestly, I don't know, for those of you in healthcare, I actually choose this for a reason. I could go work at AWS if I wanted to. Really, it's fine. I can go to Microsoft. I'm actually in healthcare because I feel like I can take my technical talents and I can actually help fix this problem in my own little way. I'm not going to fix it single-handedly. So here's what we launched a year ago. First baby steps. It was literally a year ago. We launched this. It's in production. I'm going to walk through how it works really quickly. Claim submission comes in from Assurance Reimbursement Manager. It's one of our products. Just picture a claim coming in, right? And claim, just picture a set of structured data, right? Some bytes. Doesn't really matter what they are. It goes through our claims network. And our claiming network is also an existing system. And this applies rules, checks validation. It looks for logical consistency, does a bunch of things. Every step along the way, the first thing we did is we took a Hyperledger Fabric set of nodes, and we started up alongside, and we started streaming events to this. We said, wouldn't it be interesting if you could start to have this event stream, the first step towards the vision that I talked about earlier, where everything that happens to a claim is actually, could be available to our partners. So if a payer wanted to connect, they could see at any point. A provider wanted to connect, they could see at any point where things are. The amount of claim status transactions that go on, where a provider sits there in long polls and just pings and pings and pings, says, where's my claim, where's my claim, where's my claim? And the payer's like, look, man, I'm not done with it yet. So you can actually make this where that just goes away, right? And you can have this event through here. So that's what we launched. I'm not going to walk through all these bullet points exactly, but eventually we effectively put the events onto this blockchain. We make it available for people to connect to. We used Hyperledger Fabric, super simple chain code right now. And we stood it up and got it working. We had a small team. I helped with a POC. It's been running for about a year. So we got up to 50 million transactions a day, 550 transactions per second. It's all internal. It's a private chain, right? So, but it can do it. It can hold on to our. This is about where we, kind of an average day for us. So now there's some challenges with this, and does that actually? You notice a little. I'm going to actually point out the little disclaimer down here, which is internal statistics. This is not the statistics on the full life cycle. All right, I'm not promising that level of performance at this time, but we have it running internally to handle that, and that's Fabric. So why did we choose Fabric? I wanted to bring this back to Fabric because that's why we're here. So way back in 2017, we reviewed all the landscape of existing technologies, some of which are gone, and entire new ones have arisen and fallen in the meantime. And it's always been an active community. That was actually really great. It's always a sign of something good happening, right? The modular construction was super appealing. When you think about architecture, that's what you want, right? You want the ability to componentize and extend and do your own implementations when necessary. Hyperledger Fabric's been great with that, and of course, open source. That's been key. We joined Hyperledger as a premier member. Our CTO, who's my manager, is an active member on that group, and we really think that Fabric was has a really good for doing this kind of business problem. Fabric's great. We have other problems that we're solving, more in the financial space, where it's probably not the right answer. But if you're looking at solving some sort of a business rule problem, it's really easy to get going on it. So here's what we discovered. This is from a year ago. Key takeaways. I was just having a conversation about this a little bit ago, but here's what we learned. Operationally, it's not easy, right? I mean, if you sit down and just kind of spin this up yourself, actually the instructions are great. It's not that hard, right? Take you a few hours, maybe a day if you're coming in from scratch. And you're like, yay, I've got it running. Yeah. So getting it to really running and getting to what we might call production quality is a whole different game, right? I mean, even if you're used to scaling Kubernetes and you've got a DevOps team who's really on their container management, there's still just a bunch of stuff inside of Fabric, which the scaling is really not simple. Not impossible, but the container management's not easy. The order performance out of the box left something to be desired. This is 1.0, by the way. This is a while ago. So frankly, we haven't looked into the newest version, but it had trouble keeping up. When you start looking at, then I have code lifecycle and lack of tooling. So when you start looking at operationalizing this at an enterprise level, so you need to start thinking, especially in healthcare, right? You need to start thinking about compliance, auditing, who touched what, when. How do you propagate code? How do you keep track of what changes were made to what environment, when, by whom, under what authority? All this stuff and I've been a developer a long time, but it's easy, it's fun to write code, but then the next 80% of the work is actually getting it to a place where you have all of these controls around it. That stuff's not there, right? And if you look at IDEs, like if you use Visual Studio or IntelliJ or all the tooling that devs have for doing really quick, rapid development, it's not really there. And this may have come a ways, actually, too, in the last year. So this slows you down. He mentioned Composer. We played with Composer, and we quickly discovered limitations in Composer. So this is a playground, effectively. I would call Composer a playground, a sandbox. Maybe minor production, POC level things, but we quickly discovered it did not have the capabilities of scaling to what we needed it to do. Your data management, if you've messed with Fabric and done some work on this, you might have run into this, but it's really key to what you store and what you don't. Even teeny events on the chain in your architecture add up really quickly. So you have the problem of data scaling just from a pure data volume point of view, which rapidly becomes a real problem. And there was talk of some ways in Fabric to address this, and I'm not sure where they've gone. So I meant to look that up, but I didn't quite get to it. So no matter what, you have a real problem here. Right? And in healthcare, there's also requirements about storing data for certain periods of time, and then also eliminating data. So what do you do with that? We haven't solved this, by the way. So I don't have a solution to tell you. So, but you need to really think about it. And then what do you store where? And I think this will rapidly become more complicated, and I think the solutions will come. Channel management was complicated. That was, we found that. I mean, the ideas are there, but you really need to think about what are your channels for? And how are you partitioning access to whom? And once you start to get to multiple actors in a more complex scenario than some of the examples, your channel management becomes actually quite difficult. And then your customer communication. This is one, you know, your CTO, your CEO reads an article in the airplane and then comes and says, hey, this is great. And which is true. There's a lot of potential here. But know why you're choosing a blockchain for this, right? Like think about the idea of, would you go with someone and say, hey, we're launching this new product and it's on a relational database? Okay, right? I kind of like using that example. Just substitute those words in and see if they make sense. No one cares. No one cares it's on a blockchain, right? What they care about is does the thing do what it needs to do and do the business at the right, do what it needs to do for the business. So know why you're choosing it and do the right thing. And that communication is key. So next, what we're doing, so we're exploring this. We're exploring moving to the cloud. And I really would recommend anybody who is thinking about, or if you haven't played with Fabric or you're looking at this, explore AWS Managed Blockchain. If you haven't seen this, they launched it at reInvent this year. We were involved with the preview early on. And I actually have talked to some of the people in Amazon about the underlying architecture, and they did a really solid job. They solved some amazing problems in this. So the managed provisioning, the AWS solution takes care of this. Not completely transparently, but really, really, really well. Native compatibility with Fabric. You don't actually need to change your code. We actually took our code and we ran it up on AWS, and it took us. We had a couple of devs on it. It took us about 2 days, but we were also iterating with AWS on getting some bugs worked out. So it's actually your code ports right over. They developed actually a really interesting, scalable, and performant orderer system that is a really, really, really nice piece of hardware. So well, software and hardware, but I would look at that. So, and then improve channel management. So we're exploring this actively with Amazon. We'll probably move over. We haven't decided exactly what we're going to do with that yet, but I would say that moving to the cloud, this is one. They also support Ethereum native too, right now. And a little. That's funny. And actually, you mentioned earlier, I was having a conversation before, Azure actually has a really nice solution here too. So I didn't bring it up on the slides, but Microsoft has a good solution as well. So if you look at this as typical market adoption, right? You end up with discovering the technology, you grow the technology, there's some evolution of it, and then flourishing. So in our take, healthcare is right here. It's just getting started. And if you extend this slide a little bit, you have the idea that first you start with this infrastructure. And we're still learning how to run the infrastructure. It's like we're still learning how to stand up the servers. And then not only that, but I mean, if you look at container management and Kubernetes and Istio and service meshes and all of the work that's going into microservice management, that's changing so fast right now with the offerings for not only managed Kubernetes from Google Cloud and AWS, but AWS doing their own container management as well. There's breaking changes. I mean, well, not breaking changes, but there's massive changes to Kubernetes happening every couple months. And that means the underlying technology, even underneath this technology, is still really rapidly maturing. And then you move on to POCs and pilots. That's where a lot of companies are. A lot of healthcare companies are. And then you move into, start to build up your architecture and get application development components. And move on to enterprise applications after that. And that's a couple of years probably. That's a couple of years. So we launched our first one. It's there. So the other areas we see, even in healthcare, and we're actually exploring all of these as well. We have other divisions working on this. Some of the things you can do here is in the financial aspects of payment. We actually have a product which we will be announcing shortly, which has to do with accelerating payment times in a couple of areas. So I think we're going to announce that next week at HIMSS, so 2 weeks. But you can also start to automate audits, right? Well, that would be interesting. And enforce security measures also on financial controls. So then there's clinical ideas. So integrity of data assets. This gets into the idea of electronic health records. Who has what, where? Can you prove the integrity? Can you prove who changed it? Well, blockchain has some interesting capabilities there potentially. Identity and access management across multiple entities, multiple companies, unified identity across the healthcare system. And without necessarily, right, in identity access management, you can prove who you are without, you can use some of the technology potentially to prove who you are without necessarily giving away more than you intend to about who you are. That's critical, right? With PHI. And then engagement, and this would mean engagement for all of our customers. But the idea that you can have the patient engagement, the patients start to take back control of their data, and the patients start to be engaged in the billing cycle, and the patients start to really understand what happens and where they're paying, and how we start to put power back in the hand of the patient. So with that, I'm going to actually close, and then I'll open up for questions. I'm happy to talk about anything you want. We can also move, we'll take questions, and we'll kind of go from there. So thanks for your time today.
All right, so I'll kick it off. I have a question for you, Davis. So with the solution that you have out in the public space, what's the feedback? And if you're going to do a version 2.0, what kinds of changes would you be making to it?
The feedback's been positive. I think a lot of our partners are really interested in exploring, and we've discovered a lot of our partners. There's a lot of education that needs to happen across the healthcare space to even understand what the technology can do, right? Because the continuing education that it's not a panacea, that you don't just sprinkle blockchain on something and it comes out all magically working together, which I think is some expectations. We're trying to set that expectation that that's not true. So the next steps on that, and the reception's been really good, and I think that the next steps are to continue to work with partners to find out what do they really want to do. Where is the perceived and actual pain in the life cycle management? Not only from our perception, but from the payers and from the providers.
Any aha moments or anything, any takeaways that really kind of threw you guys for a loop as far as what their use was versus your perceptions of what their use was?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I think there was a lot of just even still. I'll actually go back to it. That the perceived use cases that a lot of people saw. When you kind of drill into them a little bit, you find out that actually you could massively improve that process actually without a blockchain. You can actually do that quite a bit, and people would be really excited and say, "Oh wow, let's do it with a blockchain." And we say, "Well, you know what? Actually, you can improve that whole cycle." But what we are seeing is, like I said, the people starting to distill into what should be an appropriate use case for blockchain. So I think the aha moment was when healthcare started to wake up, really, to the technology. I remember going to conferences early on, you know, and at first it's really the crypto anarchists pretty much, and that would be the conference, and then people like me would walk in there and be hissed out of the room, right? So, because I represent the enterprise and business, and even still, I think there's this division, right, in the blockchain community, and that's fine. But the big aha has been really seeing in the last few years the business uses of this start to come to play. It's amazing how it's changed just in 2 years. So it's coming. Hey. Thank you for waiting for the mic.
In the consumer experience with your production system, what do they see when they go in and look at it, and
Yeah.
do they make sense out of it?
Okay, so to be clear, right now there's no consumer. Well, the consumer, right, is the provider or the payer system. So it's all back-end systems, and it's all at a POC. So I don't want to get. There's no UI or no consumer experience at this point. Not yet. Oh, there's a bunch. I'll let you. Well.
So can you talk about the governance of this infrastructure that you're building?
Yeah.
Because it seems very private, but it looks like you need the participation of, you know, the payers and the, you know,
We
and
do.
a variety of classes of different participants in the network.
Yes.
And so how is that all managed?
Right. That's a great question. And that's, in fact, one of the questions that we're actively pursuing over the course of the next, like right now, and even over the course of the next year. We really, if you look at this as because it has to be governed, right? So how does that work? And it would be private, right? I mean, we're really talking about private or permissioned blockchains here. So who's going to control that permission? Who controls the infrastructure? And what we are exploring right now as a company is we provide infrastructure. That's what we do. So Change Healthcare, as an infrastructure provider for this chain, right, for this platform, we already hold, like I said, we process 60% of all the claims. We provide all the infrastructure for that. So what we're exploring is a consortium of trusted partners where effectively you move to a key managed system, right, to do that. And the governance comes down through the same way you'd govern anything else, which has to do with HIPAA oversight, compliance, security, InfoSec, and you apply those same policies to your permission network. So it's using the technology as a permission network. And so it's really using it as a distributed ledger technology, totally disassociated from the ideas underlying, like Bitcoin, for instance. Does that answer your question? Does that help?
I got enough information. I want to talk to you.
Okay, sounds good. We can talk after.
Hey, I'm still fresh to blockchain, so sorry if this is a little weird. Can you explain you said you have an internal blockchain.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that consist of? Are you generating fake claims or something, or?
Well, we're using real claims. So,
Okay.
And perhaps I didn't explain it. So we have an instantiation of Hyperledger Fabric, right? So it's
Okay.
sitting there running.
Yep.
And then we have a bridge client that listens to a Kafka queue of events, which because if you go to our internal infrastructure, one of the ways that we do this is you just have queued events. It's a staged event-driven architecture underneath for the claim processing system itself. Sorry, we were architect or developer, right?
Neither.
Okay, all right.
Designer.
Let me. All right. So we effectively picture a set of events being emitted off of our claiming system, and those events are just little pieces of data, right? This claim, X happened to this claim. So we're not actually putting the claim data on the chain. We're putting metadata about the claim, about who has it, where it is, how to get to it, and that's what gets stored on the chain. So we're emitting a lot of those.
My other question is, how's the receptivity been from providers that you've been reaching out to about this?
Yeah, it's been mixed because I think a lot of times providers lack the resources to actually. Everyone gets excited, right? You come to an event or you go to a convention and everyone gets excited, and then everyone gets home and realizes that they don't have any developers. So the reception has been excited, but I think what we need to do is continue with the consortium, right? And there's sort of a critical mass that needs to happen. We're lucky as a company because we already have a big network. It's just that not everyone's on the chain yet, right? So it's been mixed. I think it'll get there. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was, can you query the metadata that's on the blockchain? Let's say you want to run some data analytics or something like that. Is it easy or difficult to do that?
You can query it, and there are some tools for querying it. It depends what you want to do. If you really want to get into high performance queryings, I probably would, much like any other system, I would probably take that back off the chain and put it into a lab platform for those of you who aren't technical, a business and analytics platform, right? I mean, you can extract the data again, and if you really want to do real queries, you can do simple queries, and yeah, you can do lookups, but anything super advanced, I would move the data over, much just like a regular database, right?
Oh, hold on.
Oh.
I'll get right to you, Frank, in just a moment.
I'm curious, you had the pros and cons of Hyperledger up there. What other platforms did you explore? And the second part to this question, if you could do it again, choosing a platform, would you still use Hyperledger? Would you use a different platform?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's good. Now you're tugging back in memory of a year ago of what we actually also explored at the time. So, because we did some other proof of concepts recently with some other platforms, so I might get this wrong, but we looked at doing an Ethereum, right, running an Ethereum chain, and that just didn't really have the right feel to it, right? It didn't seem to really meet what we wanted to do. And we took a look at just writing some other, I can't remember what else was in existence even at the time. So I'm not answering your question very well, sorry, because it was a while ago. We looked at Sawtooth, actually, and we did look at Sawtooth Lake, which is another one. The issue with that has to do with the CPU binding limitations, which means if you do want to run it in the cloud, you run into some interesting problems because it uses CPU native optimizations. And would we do it again with Hyperledger Fabric? Yeah, that was the right answer. I think it's still the right answer. And in fact, when we start to do this to the next version of this, we're going to use Hyperledger Fabric specifically. It's really powerful and really extensible and actually really pretty simple compared to some of the other platforms as well for the use cases that we're doing. I will say, the announcement that's coming up, we're not using Fabric for. We're using a different platform because it makes more sense for the financial part of it. So it depends what you're doing. Oh, I have one back there.
Microphone, does this work? So this may be kind of a futuristic question, but have you heard any discussion about using blockchain as a tool for tracking chain of custody for medical records
Yes.
between EMR systems?
Yes. Yes.
Is
Yeah,
that actually actively being done?
I don't know if anyone's actively working on it right now. I have seen, I have heard of that, and I've seen it kind of bandied about in some forums, and there was a conference. I remember I was speaking to somebody, so I have heard of that. Because much like anything else, right? You can track. I mean, once you get to the idea of tracking chain of custody on a digital asset, it's bytes, right? Bytes are bytes. Doesn't matter what it is, and it can be an image, or it can be a location, or it can be movies. It just doesn't matter. So yeah.
So the cool thing is you don't have to, replicate the application. All you're doing is doing handshakes between multiple systems and
Yes.
multiple entities.
Yes, with pointers to the actual data. Yeah.
So just a wild number 2 question. Have you ever heard of Hashgraph, and is that anywhere in your thought process?
Of what?
Hashgraph
I
as
haven't.
another
No, I actually have
blockchain
not heard of it.
tool?
Yeah.
It's pretty new, but it seems to be kind of busting through
Okay.
a lot of barriers that have been common
Nice.
before.
That's cool. I'll look it up. I will look that up. I have not heard of it. So
It's East Coast, so it's foreign country.
3 hours ahead. It's 3 hours in the yeah, 3 hours in the future, right?
I was curious about any discussions around return on investment that you've seen with the blockchain work that you've done, because it seems like it's helping facilitate communication, but not really sure how it's like
with the
affecting
business
bottom
case and the
line.
ROI on it is. Yeah. Right now, the business case has to do with future proofing and peer research, right? And the idea of insulate. So, do we have a real ROI on this calculated yet? No, and it's not in that category. This is under R&D at this point. So, that's.
And then maybe a follow-up question. Just curious about the acquisition of PocketDoc, if you have any insights there as to how you'll be leveraging
Sure.
their technology inside Change.
We're still analyzing that. It's a great question. Thank you for asking that, actually. We were really happy to acquire them for a number of reasons, for their API platform and their eligibility and their blockchain work, and they have a really great team. So we're still exploring how that's going to merge together. It's really recent. So we've begun initial conversations, and I look forward to working with the team there and understanding it, but we don't quite understand how it's all going to fit together yet, right? So we're going to work on that. And then I look forward to rolling something out on that.
I have 2 questions. First is you mentioned that lack of tooling, right? When you do the first stage. So what kind of tool you're using, and what kind of the tool you're looking for kind of help you to make the product better?
That's a good question. Yeah. So there's kind of 2 different parts. There's operational tooling, right? So, and actually this has started to come around. Oracle's starting to do some of this. IBM now has a bunch. Oracle has some actually specifically for Fabric, if I recall correctly. And IBM's, of course, gone a different direction slightly. But if you think about, you're a DevOps engineer, right? Or you're an operations engineer, let's just say, and you're sitting looking and saying, hey, is my giant complex microservices network backed by blockchain running correctly? And how do I deploy safely? How do I do zero downtime deployments? How do I do canary deployments for testing new functionality? How do I do, and canary deployments, by the way, are a lot what they sound like, canary in a coal mine. You put some new code out there and you see what breaks, and you roll it back. None of this exists, right? This is all mature technology and microservices architectures. But for blockchain architectures, you just don't have it. And there's no real good techniques yet. So a lot of this stuff is how you keep really enterprise things up and running at zero downtime. And like our systems can't go down. We have zero downtime targets for all of our systems, which we meet. We actually meet our SLAs quite handily, but they're quite high, and we can't just take things down to deploy it or delete the blockchain. So that kind of operational tooling is a lot of what I'm talking about. And second is developer tooling. So as a developer, I've got my giant screen surrounding me, right? Because you do as a developer. And what are all my tools to easily make changes really quickly, integrate with source control? How do I deploy locally? I mean, you can do it, right? It works. But let's say you're writing Go. Where's all your advanced tooling for your unit tests? How do you unit test items on the blockchain? How do you integrate? How do you do integration testing in a new system? How do you move that through various systems to production? And how do you keep track of your operations? How do you cost it? How do you keep track of how much things are costing and auditing? So those are some of the examples of tools.
So then you also mentioned the zero downtime, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of consensus algorithm you're choosing and why you're choosing that one? And we also, when the consensus algorithm kick in, there's always an incentivized model kick in to the ecosystem, which you're talking about, right? So then I just wondering what kind of consensus algorithm you are working on, and is that kind of makes big difference when you implement these solutions? Because all these kind of the ecosystem company are playing consortiums, they need incentive. They always just kind of come, then you ask them to do, and they will do it.
So can you rephrase that?
Yeah, the consensus algorithm I view as very important stuff when you design a blockchain solution, right? So when, if you're using Ether, then when you're picking their algorithm, also the benefit you will get is incentivized kind of incentive.
Oh,
model,
right. You're talking about
right?
incentive. Okay.
Yeah, and that usually will help a lot on the ecosystem adoption or consortium adoption, because everybody got a benefit, right? Because I'm doing that, I got a benefit. So when you do the solution, like you just said, in this kind of the claim procedure, I see multiple entities in your picture. They benefit from what kind of benefit you provided to them to use your solution?
Yeah, so the way we would look at that, right, and this is where you get into permission blockchain, which differs from the incentivization model on public chains, right? Because almost certainly what we would do is use the benefits of a distributed ledger technology for the rapid dissemination of information. And then what we do, our business model would have to do with providing the underlying network and charging per transaction, right? Much like it's exactly what we do now. Right now, we provide endpoints, we provide all kinds of data analysis and working and validation and working models for that data, and we send it to the right places. We do all of that, and we get paid per transaction, right? They don't see any of that underlying hardware. It would be something, and sometimes we actually do have servers, by the way, or actual physical hardware in our clients' data centers already. For various reasons. So it's not that far a stretch to say, well, if you did something similar, right, the trust and the permission comes from a contract model, right, rather than using any kind of consensus model and a consensus algorithm necessarily. Now, you could do a simple consensus algorithm that says, hey, the payer and the provider have to both agree on this, right? But this is where it changes a little bit from the idea of incentivizing the person running the hardware through mining. It just that isn't part of the current model on this. It takes it back to a more traditional business model.
Because you also mentioned zero downtime.
Yeah.
If you pick the right consensus algorithm, you can get that for free, kind of my view.
Yeah, yeah.
Then consensus algorithm still matters.
Well, it could, yeah, and there's other ways to model this as well. So, yeah, I mean, we're still exploring, I guess would be the way to put that.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay, cool. I love the questions. Thank you, everybody. This is great. I'm glad I made sure I kept the presentation short.
At what point do you guys price blockchain versus non-blockchain solutions? Like compare the cost and benefit of the two?
That's a really good question that we're still working through. I literally just don't have an answer to that right now because we need to understand. It kind of goes back to the ROI question. We need to understand that. We need to get these models, and we need to model that out and see what is it really going to cost us to provide this. We see that. We see, okay, you kind of like, hey, that looks like a really good idea. Okay, now let's figure out what it's going to really be. And that's where we are. So I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for that right yet. But talk to me in a year.
Did you guys implement any smart contracts? And if you did you see the speed decrease on the chain?
We didn't. We did some basic POC work on that to test with it, and then that work hasn't really continued. So my expectation is that, for now, but the expectation is that it would, but we have not done extensive testing on that. So.
I'll interject because I had a question about performance. So you could have a couple slides back there on transactions per month. Break that down into TPS, transactions per second, which is more in line with what
550.
So was that ever seen as bottlenecking in any way?
No, actually.
Good.
No, it wasn't. That actually was able to meet the flow of our other transactions.
So how do you think, or have you thought through how this may change your business model, how you do charge?
We are thinking through that actually as of.
What are the things that you're coming up with now?
Yeah, that's the. It's a good question because we are actively analyzing how that's going to change our business model because it could disrupt it immensely, right? And what we see is if you start making some assumptions about commoditization of hardware and commoditization of network, then your cost per transaction needs to drop, probably not to zero, but asymptotically towards zero, right? No matter what. And that's almost without blockchain. It's still going to be the same problem when this becomes a commodity. And that is, if you take that as an assumption on the intelligent healthcare network, that's actually a foundational assumption that our transactional costs need to drop dramatically. And part of the design we're doing, even with or without blockchain and intelligent medical network, is making sure that we're accounting for that. So I would say that when you're looking at this, really think about that, right? Think about how it could radically change the business model. And maybe it isn't even per transaction anymore. Maybe that doesn't make sense, right? Maybe even that term doesn't make sense anymore. And so how does that start to work? Like where does that go? And this is part of the future that we see and why we're actively investigating it. So I don't have a good answer for how it will change our business model. We know it will, and I think that the best thing we can do on that is to be proactive about understanding how it will, and we're still exploring.
You talked about high-level kind of conceptual challenges, but did you or your technical staff just run into any just really tough problems, coding-wise? Or is it, it's just Go under the hood and some data modeling? Just wondering if you
frankly,
had any big challenges
it was some
there.
Go and some data modeling. Yeah, it was really from the operations, DevOps, the DevOps stuff, which I hear. There's somebody, I'm going to have to come listen to your to your talk. That was the hard part. The coding, the code is actually really simple for that kind of basic stuff. A bit of Go and kind of good to go. So, yeah. So no real hard in terms of. I would say Fabric is very, very easy to program on, right? Yeah. That was my experience. Yeah. Then it becomes less easy.
So did you see in your solution who is a middleman? Usually we know that when blockchain solution kick in, some middleman will be removed.
Yeah.
And
that's
which one so you will be removed, right? So basically, you're saying that if this network or solution running very well, you are lost to your job.
Yeah.
Sorry for being that direct.
Yeah. I think it'd be better if our company looks at doing that to ourselves than if somebody else does it to us.
So you guys realize that you are the middleman, and if this model runs well with the right incentive model and extremely lower the cost, then you don't have any value to your customer.
Potentially. There are ways in which we actually do add value to the customer, though. Because if you look at it's the same way we add value now as a middleman. There are multiple ways we add value now, so let me rephrase that. There are multiple ways we add value right now as a middleman. One of which is the outsourcing of business rules, right? And the actual work done for payers and during the claim processing and billing is vastly more complex than is easily codified. And we have large systems that run this. The part where we're a network middleman is that's a really interesting potential, right, for a disruption. Where all of those rules start to live, does that live? Potentially, right? Potentially it could. In an ideal vision, potentially it could. So, we realize that this is one of the reasons we're excited about this, right? And working on it because, right? Yeah. We realize it. We know. We know. So we'd rather help solve it.
Good questions. Anyone else? Well, I'm gonna add one more then, Davis.
All right.
So you had brought up the notion that you may be looking at a consortium going forward, and so many of us might know that in the healthcare space, Optum, about a year ago, announced their consortium with, I think we're up to maybe about 8 different players, I should say payers in that space. How are you sort of structuring the consortium that you referred to, or is it too early to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's a little early to talk about that still. I mean, the Optum work is there, and actually, if you haven't read about, I would encourage everybody to go read about the IBM announcement too. This last week with, there's an IBM announcement regarding some foundational platforms in healthcare. I think that what we need to continue to do is just educate all the partners and understand why and exactly be able to communicate exactly why we're forming that consortium and what it's for. And I think that once we do that, everyone wants to form a consortium, right? I mean, this is like, it's one of the things in the last year, let's form a consortium. But we need to understand why we're doing it and what benefit everybody gets out of it. It can't be just to benefit us, it should be to benefit everyone in the consortium.
All right, anything else? All right, let's give Davis a big hand.
Cool.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. All right. Hey, thanks so much for the questions and having me here today. It was great talking. Some good stuff to look at, so thank you.